Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and spousal abuse. I'm going to talk about some indicators in the natal chart at first, as far as some propensity, perhaps for spousal abuse. So anyway, well, in the natal chart, like somebody, can have Mars in Libra. Mars in Libra is in Mars is in its detriment, of course, in Libra. I know a lot of Mars and Libra energy may be like passive aggressive, and it's not necessarily really overly acerbic. But the point is, you can have, Mars is volatility, and Libra is relationships. So somebody with Mars and Libra, as an example, may have some situations that are contentious with their spouse and those relationships with the spouse. And Mars in Scorpio, even though Mars of course is in its dignity in Scorpio, remember that Mars again is about battles and combat, and you have Scorpio, is hot-blooded. Scorpio is also connected with our intimate sexual relationships, so it can be contentious situations with the ones that are very deep and provocative, those connections, which doesn't exclude a significant other or spouse. Now, especially if this energy is afflicted in one's chart. Now, if somebody, say, has Chiron in their, or Mars in their seventh house, this could be an indicator as well. Mars in the seventh house can be an indicator of volatile relationships and ones that have a lot of battles. Libra on the cusp of the seventh house can be, Aries on the cusp of the seventh house can be another example. With Aries on the cusp of the seventh, of course, Libra is the ascendant, but even a peaceful, tranquil Libra that's rising, that would be striving for peace, may be embroiled in a number of relationships that could be combative, and it doesn't exclude one's spouse. Now, Mars in Cancer, I wouldn't exclude, because Mars in Cancer can have there could be a lot of combative situations on the home front. And again, not to be redundant with excluding, but it doesn't exclude the spouse. It could be on a domestic level. Domestic abuse can be connected with the spouse, and often you have those contentious situations that do involve the significant other in one's chart. If somebody has their Mars strongly afflicted, or even like say Venus, for example, let's say their Venus makes an adverse aspect to their Mars in their natal chart, that could be an indicator of anger being directed at the significant other, and it could be an indicator for spousal abuse as well. So anyway, and remember that abuse, can manifest in more than just a physical nature. If somebody's got Pluto making an adverse aspect to their natal moon in their chart, there may be a proclivity for emotional abuse. And say if you have Sagittarius in that mix, or Gemini, or very like this effervescent or jovial sign, there might be some enjoyment in that as well, perhaps, sadly. But these I'm just making general statements as far as this goes. Now, spousal abuse, also looking at transits that could be indicators for this. Basically what I described above. If you have like transit, let's say if you have transit Mars in your seventh house, or transit Chiron hits your seventh house during that time, there may be a greater propensity for volatile activity in a relationship, and often that can be the spouse if you are married. Let's say even election, like say if transit Mars goes into Cancer, there could be a strong, or transit Mars hitting Libra, or Scorpio. You could have a little stronger proliferation of that kind of volatility in relationships, more so than usual during that time. But again, going back to transits to the natal chart, you could have, let's say, transit Mars makes an adverse aspect to your natal Venus. This could be a time where the situation in your relationships may be more contentious and combative, more so than usual, and often that can be the connected with the spouse. So those are some examples. And if you have transit Chiron or Mars hitting your ascendant or your sun, this could be an indicator where you might be more vulnerable or susceptible to physical injury. Say if transit Chiron is hitting your ascendant, let's say Chiron's in Gemini, and it might be something where you might be harm may be inflicted. There's a greater propensity for harm being inflicted on you in terms of, maybe shoulder injuries, or with the arms, or something with the hands or the fingers, something that could likely be Gemini related. So those are some, things. And also too, I mean, you're looking at, let's say even transit Pluto hits one's seventh house in one's natal chart. Pluto, can be like about sexual domination and in a negative manifestation, and it could be some kind of abuse one may be enduring from a spouse, where it might not be consensual sex, and it's like forced or coerced sex in some cases where that when that transpires. So anyway. But it's also important to look at, as far as like the other person's chart. If you have a significant other, and say their chart has has certain volatile tendencies or proclivities in it, say that their Mars is strongly afflicted, or they have Aries, Scorpio, or Leo dominant in their chart, especially if that energy is afflicted. And even Capricorn, remember that Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Capricorn can be one of the more volatile signs, not so much, I don't think, as Aries, Scorpio, or Leo, because of course Aries and Scorpio both have the Mars rulership. We understand that Leo can have a very explosive, fiery temperament. Yes, Sagittarius can as well, but Sagittarius is mutable. Sagittarius is more jocular and jovial too. It's more easygoing energy. Leo really will often want to dominate through, a negative manifestation through bullying, which of course can be about violence. So those, if you have that energy, that significant other has that energy, you still, even if your synastry between you and that significant other is good, there still may be, certain danger signs that you have to look at in that other person's chart. But based on their own chart, if that significant other has Mars making an adverse aspect to their natal Pluto, it could be somebody that really derives maybe some power through some anger, through hitting, through things that are of a volatile nature, it could be punching or whatever they decide to do that may be violent. Now, also, let's go into the synastry between two natal charts. Let's say that somebody has their Mars or their Chiron on a spouse's ascendant, sun, or even their Mars. This could be an indicator there where there could be injury to that person from the person that has the Mars or Chiron, the Mars or Chiron on the other person's ascendant, sun, or Mars. If the person that has that ascendant, sun, or Mars may be more susceptible to certain volatile actions from that person. Chiron can be about emotional wounds, but they can be about physical wounds as well. I know somebody, knew somebody on Facebook one time that it was actually, I believe it was her stepfather, I think it was his Chiron, was on her ascendant, and he was very physically abusive toward her. Now, I know we're talking about spousal abuse, but anyway, if somebody has Mars conjunct Mars in synastry, sometimes, this could be an indicator where you can have a lot of anger, a lot of tension and exasperation, because neither person may want to be subservient to the other. Both people may want to be taking the lead, basically, and neither one may want to be dictated what to do by the other person, and might take strong offense to it if that does happen. So that can cause a lot of agitation. I had a friend where my Mars was conjunct his Mars in Cancer, and we would have often frequent battles over food, about my speed that I was eating. And of course, Cancer can be connected with food. So, there you go. If somebody, say, has their Mars on Mars and Scorpio conjunct another person's Mars and Scorpio, that could be an indicator of, each maybe trying to control the other or try to exude some kind of power over each other in it, which could cause a lot of tension and exasperation because neither person is really likely going to comply with those wishes, with, it was succumb to that power basically exhibited by the other person. Now, hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that, I'm back. But anyway, and again, going back to emotional, I mean, you could have situations with emotional manipulation. If you have Pluto adverse, making an adverse aspect to one's moon in synastry, that could be about emotional manipulation. And say if Leo is involved in that as an example, it could be where it's really domination as well, or even I would say Scorpio. But let's take an example. I mean, as far as synastry goes, as far as what an example what could be really negative. Now, let's take somebody that has their Mars in Cancer, making a square to another person's moon in Aries, so, spouse's moon in Aries. The Mars in Cancer person may have a tendency to bring up past hurts, which could cause acrimonious emotional responses from the moon in Aries person. Now, another thing to look at is the composite chart, because composite chart is really about the general characteristics of a relationship. It can show relationship proclivities and tendencies. And the thing is, I mean, if in a composite chart, let's say that the ascendant is Aries, or Mars is in the first house, or Mars is very strongly afflicted, if Mars is even in Libra or Scorpio, or if Chiron, let's say Chiron is on the sun or the ascendant, I mean, it can be a situation where the relationship may be somewhat contentious, and it wouldn't exclude physical violence or some kind of abuse in it. If Mars is making an adverse aspect to Pluto, that could be an indicator for some kind of, control through sex, which wouldn't exclude sexual abuse. Uh, if you have, and also too, basically what I've been describing, look for these things, I mean, in a progressed chart as well. If you have, in your, like, say, if you have a significant other and their natal chart seems, really seems to be safe in terms of, volatile tendencies. If you look at their progressed chart as well, and I mean, let's say, I mean, they got their progressed seventh house in Aries or Mars or Chiron, or say in your chart. I mean, let's look at your chart, for example. I should say in your progressed chart. Let's say that the seventh house cusp is Aries, or you have Mars in the seventh house in the progressed chart, or Chiron in the seventh house in the progressed chart. That could be an indicator where you might be a little bit more susceptible to some kind of spousal abuse at that time, if you are married at that time, of course. And also in the significant others chart, and see if there's anything in the progressed chart where they're showing, there might be more tendencies toward volatile actions, or some kind of or spousal abuse, like say in their progressed chart, if Venus is making an adverse aspect to their natal Mars, or their Mars is progressed into Libra or Scorpio or even Cancer, because again, Mars in Cancer or even in the fourth house can be about contentious situations that are domestic, which wouldn't exclude the spouse. Now, and another example, I mean, as far as, like, say, emotionally, so let's say that you have an ex that was a spouse, that, like, a former ex, and let's say that person has Pluto and Scorpio, and it's making an opposition to that other person's moon in Taurus. Well, the obsessive stalking, it could be obsessive stalking from the moon Pluto and Scorpio person, may be really adversely affecting that person, the moon Taurus emotional need for peace and stability and tranquility, and may be feeling much less relaxed and calm due to that other person, the Pluto and Scorpio person. Now, let's take an example when we're talking about this. Let's say that somebody, a little bit more involved, detailed example. Let's say, for example, that somebody has their Mars in Gemini, right? and this person is abusive, and this person's Mars in Gemini makes a square aspect to the other person's ascendant. And let's say that person's Mars in Gemini conjuncts that other person's midheaven. Well, not only there could be a little propensity for physical harm, given that Mars is making an adverse aspect to the person's ascendant, which of course is the physical body, but it could also malign. It might do something to that person's reputation, or this person may go out publicly and really show the injuries or the inflicted harm by that person from the Mars and Gemini person. And the injuries could either, let's say that Mars and Gemini, again, if it's squaring the person's ascendant, let's say of course Virgo would likely be the ascendant, that person may have injuries maybe that are Virgo related. That could be by the spleen area, or and if the Mars and Gemini person, because Mars and Gemini is involved, it could also be injuries to the arms, the fingers, the hands, the shoulders. So anyway, people, that'll pretty much do it. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.